behalf of all of us at Celigo, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join us for today's platform update. My name is Dave Wallen. I am the Director of Platform Product Marketing here at Celigo, and I'm very pleased to introduce you all to Tyler Lamparter. Tyler is the perfect person to be doing this webinar. While he's currently a Principal Product Manager here at Celigo, he's been a solution consultant, and prior to that, he was a customer and power user of the platform. In fact, a year and a half ago, Tyler, you would have been on the other side of this webinar, right?
I would have, Dave, yep.
So we've got a full and exciting agenda for you all today, but before we get started, a couple of quick housekeeping items. The presentation is being recorded. You'll receive a link to the recording in your inbox shortly after the session is over. If you have questions during the presentation, please enter them into the Q&A panel on your screen. We'll try to address questions in context when we can, but we've reserved time at the end of the session for Q&A. So, Tyler, you ready to get started?
Yep, I'm ready.
All right. So, our goal today is not to repeat everything in the release notes. They come out with every release, but to provide some color and depth around the new features and updates that will have the most impact for all of you out there. We've organized today's content into three major categories. We're going to talk about performance improvements to the platform, talk about new functionality to improve and simplify the process of creating integrations, some new security and governance capabilities. We'll wrap up with a review of additional resources that Celigo provides, where you can learn more about these topics that we're going to cover today, as well as other platform features and how you can engage directly with the product team. And then we'll start the Q&A. So anything you want to add before we get started, Tyler?
No, I'm ready to rock and roll.
All right. So let's get started with a discussion of some of the changes we've made to the platform infrastructure.
Yep, awesome, thanks, Dave. Yep, so we've made several improvements to performance of the platform. So just to kind of start off, right, we've migrated to React 18. So this is going to help improve render performance of flows and concurrent mode capabilities. We've also transitioned to Material UI v5. So you'll have more of a cohesive UI and enhanced UI experience. Several other migrations, some React testing library migrations, transition to latest versions of really all just UI improvements. So as you're building out your flows, as you're building out your integrations and everything within the product, right? Everything's cohesive, everything's working fluid so that you can work with it without running into any issues. Everything's quick and efficient. Along with performance improvements, we have more resiliency in the event of crashes. So, inevitably, sometimes things will crash, some things won't go right. Historically, when something has crashed or not performed correctly, every flow that was kind of utilizing that connection would crash. So all of your flows utilizing that same connection would go down, or all the pages that you were kind of going up to that point on your imports or exports on your flows, they would just kind of stop, right? They would just stop mid in their tracks. You could have thousands of records going through, and it would just stop right there. In this case, the improvement is as we're paging data through the platform, in the event of a crash, only that specific page is going to crash through. And then all subsequent pages will continue moving on. So this is relevant for any flows that are on exporting all. Any flows that are using like webhooks and Delta exports are still currently the same, but in the case that you're exporting all data, all that subsequent page data will continue to move through the platform unchanged. And then future improvements, right? In the event of a crash in the future, eventually we'll be able to auto retry those, so that even if it does happen, right, you won't actually have to ever see that.
Outstanding. So there have been significant improvements to the platform to simplify and accelerate creation of integrations. But we're going to start with new connectors, right, Tyler?
That's right.
So, depending on whom you, what kind of teams you're supporting, there are some exciting new connectors. If you support sales and marketing teams, you may be interested in connectors for Clearbit, Cvent, ListTrack, or Nimble. Or if there's their marketing element, you might be interested in the new connectors for Meta or Twitter ads, or are they X ads? I'm not sure anymore. For HR teams, we've released connectors for Ceridian, Dayforce, and Lever. Product management teams, I know, will be very excited to see a new connector for Pendo. And we've also released connectors for Trello, which is probably the leading product management tool, and a very popular IT management platform, JumpCloud. You can see the details on all of these, as well as some of the other new connectors in the release notes. But before we move on from new connectors, there are a select group that we're going to highlight, right, Tyler?
Yep. So the main one we're wanting to highlight, Dave, is our new connection to Kafka. So as a part of a growing initiative, right, we're trying to get into all these different messaging systems to be able to stream messages and publish messages out to various endpoints. So our first connector that we've brought out is Kafka connector. So you'll be able to publish out records to Kafka topics. This way you can utilize it across your organization or for whatever internal processes that you've got going on that utilize Kafka. Down the road, we'll also be supporting other messaging queue type systems. But this is kind of a main area of focus on connectivity for the platform. And we're starting here with Kafka.
Yes, and another area that we're focusing on is intelligent data processing. We know it's an important part of process automation for a lot of our customers. These are the tools that will extract data from documents, including forms, invoices, receipts, emails. Tyler, what use cases have you seen for IDP?
Yeah, so really the main use case for IDP, and maybe not the main use case, but the most popular one that I see out there is AP automation, right? So you've got various different PDF files being sent to you from your various vendors, and you need to process that into your ERP system. Now, some people might have an AP automation software, but a lot of people want to also just have that within Celigo or some middle layer where you're actually extracting those PDF documents, sending it off to this document processor, right? So they return you back the data of the PDF, and then you're just actually creating those invoices, creating all the various vendor bills within your ERP system that you need to based off of that PDF document. So it's a really good way to intelligently process documents. And we focused on outsourcing to connect to these document processors that are external versus an internal system, because they have, that's their core competencies to process documentation and then spit you back the data that's on it.
Right. Yeah, we chose to we considered building that functionality to the platform, but went in the direction of providing robust connectivity to the best of breed products, because that's what gives our customers greater flexibility and allows them much more flexibility. We've released the connectors for Docparser and for Microsoft's Azure Form Recognizer. Coming up very soon, there'll be a connector for AWS's TextTrack and more to come. And of course, Tyler, we've made updates to many of our existing connectors. We've got a few up here. We've updated dozens. We've added API resources, version updates, or additional capabilities to simplify usage. Bro, highlighted a few here, but you can get all of the details in the release notes. So Tyler, what else have we added to make it easier for users?
Yep. So outside of connectors, we'll kind of go into various different high-level platform functionality that's been implemented. So the first one that I wanted to go through with you all is our new Snowflake metadata support. So historically, right, with Snowflake, the connector that we had, whenever you were mapping over tables to Snowflake, you had to copy in the table name, right? Once you copied in the table name, you didn't have drop-down lists of the metadata fields that were on that table. So just like you're used to with like NetSuite connectors, Salesforce connectors, all the various connectors that give you context on what you're working with, we've done the same thing for Snowflake. So whenever you're going to Snowflake, you've got a list of the table options that are all the tables within your Snowflake environment. So you can easily just select which table you want to go to. Once you've selected your table that you want to go to, when you do your mapping to the table, you actually have a drop-down list, right, of all the fields that you can map to that are relevant to the table that you selected. So and here's where I wanted to go through a quick demo and just kind of highlight that functionality in the platform. So if I go over to Integrator IO, I've got a few demos here that I'll be going through here today, but the first one here is metadata support for Snowflake. So if I go into the flow here, in this example, right, I'm pulling out data from NetSuite. And if you guys aren't familiar, back over in March, we released a NetSuite JDBC connection to NetSuite, which allows you to really pull out mass amounts of data out of NetSuite as opposed to a traditional Safe Search. So with that ability, right, you can query NetSuite directly with simple SQL queries. Once you've got the data out and you want to bring it over to Snowflake, in that example, right, I was pulling out transaction data from the transaction table, going over to Snowflake. When I go into my import settings here, right, I've got my destination table. This is specifying what table you want to go to within your Snowflake environment. If I delete what was existing there, right, you can see I've got a list of available options of different tables within our environment that you can go to. In my case, right, I just named it NetSuite JDBC transaction, pretty simple. And then you can just point and click. So I will close out of that and then go into mapping. So you can see here that I don't have any mappings currently set to Snowflake. And along with having suggestions on what fields are available, we also have auto mapper functionality that we added in as well. If I click the plus sign here and go into mapping, you'll see I've got my data from NetSuite, just a simple ID, created date, and then transaction ID. Those fields are over here on the left-hand side like you're used to, but then I get over onto the right-hand side, and these are the fields that are available on that Snowflake table that I specified on the import step. But as opposed to having to go here and map one by one, I'm just going to click auto map fields, and you can see all my mappings are automatically created for me. So for these 3 fields that I've got, it tries to auto map it to fields that you've got on your Snowflake table. And here, right, I can already just save and close. It's already done. Additionally, right, I could still modify this to map additional fields or hard code values, everything else that you're used to. Just gets a more streamlined approach to getting data into Snowflake. Awesome. Cool. Yeah, so the next thing I wanted to go through is downloading files from your response body. So a lot of times when you're working with like files between various systems, you want to be able to extract the actual file and then transport it to some destination. In this use case, it could be like a main use case is like product images, right? Your product images might be stored externally on some system. They're publicly available to get the file itself or extract it. But historically with Celigo, in order to extract that file, you would have had to make a connection for each unique base URL of each unique file. So if you had, maybe you were storing your documents or files in 5 different systems, right? You would have had to make 5 different connections to grab those files. With this feature, we've made it easy to specify a path to those file URLs, and then we will actually go download them, store them in temporary storage that you can then use to transport it down the road. So I'll go through a demo here real quick because it kind of highlights really what I'm showcasing here. Okay, download file URL. You can see here I've got my source is just getting screenshot URLs from a generic endpoint and then putting over into S3 buckets. When I go into my export step and preview it here, you can see my request body, or you can see my preview here, right, has this download URL. If I were to just open this up in a new web page, right, you would see just a sample file, right? So I don't have to sign in for this. It's just a publicly available file to download. Given that I have that URL available, I want to actually get the file and then move it into my S3 bucket. In this case, I would go under non-standard API response patterns, come down here to path to file URLs. And in our path, it's just this screenshots array, right? So I'm just specifying fields.screenshots. We will loop through all of those URLs and then grab the blobs for them. Awesome. So that's the main use case there for downloading file URLs. Next up would be Mapper 2.0 destination field suggestion. So Mapper 2.0 is the new mapping functionality that we came out with late last year. Really lets you build the JSON payload that you want to a destination, but just kind of like in that Snowflake use case, right? You want to have suggestions on what to build out. So I don't want to have to start from a blank slate. I want to be able to have suggestions available to me so that I can more easily build it out. So in this case, I'll come back over to Celigo. Go into my third flow here. And in this case, I'm just going a simple flow from NetSuite to Shopify. Whenever an order is canceled in NetSuite, bring it over into Shopify and cancel it as well. When I come over to the Shopify mapping step, come over here. You can see, right, if I delete some of these here, you can see right now I have no mappings, just currently the currency because it's a required mapping field. When I add a new mapping, you can see my destination fields are now pre-populated with suggestions. So we know what payload is required for this specific endpoint on Shopify. So we actually bring that in here and then let you just select and point and click. Additionally, right, I could go through here and still build out the destination based off the recommendations, but I could also come up here to the top right and then auto-populate all the destination fields based off of that sample payload that we've provided based off of Shopify's APIs. So if I go click here, auto-populate, I now have my mappings for notes, amounts, currencies. Under refund, I've got all my restocking note fields already mapped. And then all you have to do is map the source field to that destination field. Next up, we're going to go into some things we won't fully demo out here, but we'll go into just some enhancements. So like I mentioned, back in March, we released a new NetSuite JDBC connector. So this is functionality to be able to connect into NetSuite backend to perform SQL queries. When we released the connector, we only supported NetSuite's newest schema type, NetSuite 2.com, which is an updated version. But a lot of people have been using the old NetSuite schema, NetSuite.com schema type, since NetSuite's inception a long time ago. So since a lot of people were still utilizing that older schema, even though it is a deprecated schema from NetSuite and new fields aren't being added to it, we still decided to support it. So some small enhancements here for the NetSuite JDBC connector are to allow you to connect into that old schema type and then pull your data across. So this will really simplify if you already had a lot of reporting and analytics graphs and reports built out utilizing the old schema, you don't have to make that migration yet over onto NetSuite's new schema. Now, it's still eventually down the road would be recommended to migrate over because we don't know when NetSuite will actually deprecate the old schema type where you actually couldn't use it anymore. And new customers of NetSuite actually can't even utilize the old schema. So eventually it'd be a good thing to migrate, but in the meantime, we've supported the old way as well. Additionally, on top of that, we've historically, we have had API documentation in the Help Center. So if you go into the Help Center, you can see some API documentation. But for people that wanted to actually bring it into Postman, we didn't have an easy way to download a file of all of our endpoints and bring it over into Postman so that you could actually test out as a developer. So what we've done is consolidated all of our APIs into a Postman collection so you can easily just download it, upload it into Postman, and then quickly start making requests. So we've added in, export endpoints, connection endpoints, really all the main API and endpoints that you would utilize across Celigo. So this will just really make it easier for developers so they don't have to build out their own collection for our own APIs. And eventually we'll keep adding to this collection. And then long-term down the road, eventually have a developer center built out for this. Next piece we wanted to go through is Delta export previews. So if a lot of you guys have built out flows that have, they're running on Delta. So an example, right, I'm pulling Shopify orders and going over to NetSuite or going to some other ERP system. Historically, the Delta timestamp that we would set on the back end whenever you were previewing and building out that flow, it would be like today minus a year. But occasionally you wouldn't always have data that was up to date, especially if it's like in a sandbox environment that you're working with. You might maybe have old data, and you would actually want to specify your Delta export timestamp for when you are previewing your flows. So this kind of led to users, they would set up their flow to export all results. And then when they were done with their flow, they would have to come back and change it over to a Delta export, or try and remember to change it to a Delta export, right, once you were done. So in this case, I'll go into a quick demo, but you'll be able to actually specify what Delta export and timestamp that you want to utilize when you're previewing your data. So I discard my changes here from my old flow, come into flow number 4. On my source side for Shopify, I'm just making a simple get orders from Shopify, pushing it over into Snowflake, into a Snowflake table. On my Shopify export, you can see I'm just retrieving a list of orders here. I've got it set to Delta export type. When I preview here, you'll notice no records were available to preview because the date that it was going back to didn't have any records available. But we actually will prompt you up here, right, and say, no records were available. Do you want to try a different date to go back to? In this case, this is a sandbox environment that we barely place orders for. If I go back to 2013 and now preview it, you can now see that exported data over on the right-hand side. So I would have had to go back to 2022 in order to get data for this specific endpoint. Cool. So it really just helps you build out flows how they should be initially, as opposed to having to go back and modify the flow afterwards just because of the way that the preview was working. And then next up, we've got some smaller enhancements here. So iClients, if you guys aren't familiar with, earlier this year, we released a separate resource available for connections called iClient. So for a lot of OAuth 2 endpoints, like Google is a good example. They've got Google Sheets, Google Docs, Google Drive. They all potentially utilize the same client credentials underneath the hood. Or in this case, Meta, Facebook ads, Instagram ads, utilize the same client credentials to access different API endpoints and different resources. The iClient lets you have this standalone resource with your client credentials to get your access token. And then your connection level would actually be specific to like Instagram ads or Facebook ads. That way you didn't have to basically copy your credentials 3 or 4 different times for your various different connections. And in this case, the iClient framework has been updated a little bit further to support multiple APIs. So in the example of Meta, being able to quickly just select, I want Instagram ads or I want Facebook ads, and then a lot of those forms being pre-populated with the necessary data that you need specific to that endpoint. Additionally, if a lot of you guys have utilized JavaScript hooks within the platform, we've got some pretty good UI enhancement here. So historically, wherever there was a JavaScript function, you couldn't always create the script directly within your context. So if I was on a flow and I wanted to create a transform script, for example, I would have had to go back out under resources over on the left-hand side of your page. I would have had to go to scripts, click the plus sign, create a script, go back to my flow, and then select the flow from the drop-down list that I had created in a separate context. So this enhancement is really to focus on leaving you in your current context. So wherever there is a script available to create, you can now just easily create it and click the plus sign directly within your flow. So you don't ever have to lose that context and switch back and forth between your various screens. So pretty, simple enhancement, but a really good usability enhancement, especially for people that are utilizing JavaScript hooks a lot. Next up, our next section here is security and governance. So we've got a few different enhancements here for security and governance. The first one, which I'm sure a lot of you guys are excited about and excited to see, is being able to identify who canceled flows. So historically, right, whenever a flow was canceled, you couldn't really see, you didn't really have much context into who canceled the flow, why it was canceled. But now you'll be able to see who canceled it, when it was canceled, or just see, who it was canceled by. So whether it was, in this case, if it was Ravi that canceled it, or maybe it was a system cancellation, maybe for some reason there was a crash, or for whatever reason, the flow had to be canceled when it was running. So this really kind of gives more of an audit log trail, right, of you being able to see what's been done in the platform. So you're not kind of left in the dark and have to create support tickets to have support figure out on the back end who actually canceled it. So it's really just a good auditing and governance experience for users. And then customers having the ability to audit changes for multi-factor authentication. So I'm not sure how many people are aware of all the auditing logs that we have within the platform. So I kind of wanted to quickly show that in case you're not familiar. So if I come over into the top right, there's several places that there are audit logs. So on the integration layer itself, there are audit logs for your integration. So you can see who changed what, when they changed it, what they changed. So the old and new value between what they changed. Additionally, at the flow level and at import and export levels. But if you come over into your account, up in the top right and under my profile, you can see a few audit logs there as well. So if I come over to audit log tab, again, it's the same kind of view, right? I can see who changed what, when they changed it. The additional context here is that you'll be able to see all your multi-factor authentication changes that are happening within your account. So if I come over here to security, if I come over here to users, and let's say I disable my other user here, come back to the audit log, and I can see, myself, I updated false to true, disabled the multi-factor authentication for that user. And I guess I kind of sped through there, Dave, but.
You know what? Actually, we're okay. We did a half hour. We've got a couple of things to wrap up, and we do have some questions that we can get to after we kind of get this bit done. So, a couple of things before we get to Q&A. As we said in the beginning, this isn't meant to be an encyclopedic review of everything new and updated this summer. The place for that is our Help Center, and that's where you can find the full release notes for each of the 2 releases we covered today, with additional information on new features and updates. It includes links to articles with additional detail and a lot of media on every topic. In fact, you can just simply click on the What's New on the left navigation bar in Integrator IO and go straight there. But release notes are only a small part of the Help Center. It includes our complete knowledge base, as well as access to technical support. It also includes a community section, which is great if you've got a question that's more than a simple how-to or what did this work. If you're thinking about how to approach a unique problem and you're wondering if someone else has tried it, or you can post your inquiries. It's kind of like Celigo's Reddit for Integrator IO. So that's where also you'll find Celigo University, right? And that's where you can access all of our free online training, both in person as well as on demand. You can learn everything you want to build, test, and manage integrations. And there are learning paths that are on specific areas of interest. And you can also achieve one or all of our 4 levels of certification. And before, during, or after certification, anyone who's working on custom flows, whether you're customizing a template or creating a flow from scratch, can get extra help during our office hours. They're typically held weekly on Tuesdays from 10 to 11:20 Pacific time. And you can access the registration form from the help and feedback page in the Help Center. Did I miss anything there, Tyler?
No, I think that's good. I did want to kind of show it real quick, because I think these are very powerful resources for you to have available. And I've, as a solution consultant previously, I would always go through all these resources available to customers, so that they could interact with us and get the help that they needed. So to start off, come over here, left-hand side of your screen is just the Help Center, right? So I come to the Help Center, and this is where all the knowledge-based articles are based out of. Additionally, I could come to the community. This is where community members can post questions, and typically I'll probably be the first one to respond to it, just because I love being in the community and answering questions that various customers have. Eventually I might push you over to support, because I can't sit in there, all day going back and forth, but a lot of times I can pretty quickly just answer a question and get you going, get you on your way, without you having to kind of reach out. But we also have a lot of partners that have started also answering those posts. So it's really nice to see everybody kind of pitching in and giving their feedback on the product, giving user suggestions on what to do. Over in the Help Center, like Dave was saying, over in the What's New section, which you can also grab from this What's New tab over on the left-hand side. But in the What's New section, you've got our various release notes that you can go through to see all the specific content for each release. And then we do releases every 6-8 weeks or so. And then in the middle, we usually have kind of maintenance or patch releases. So those will actually start to get their own release notes as well. So you can see here, we had a patch release over in July, end of July here. So in the middle of all these releases are typical releases for small incremental improvements or small bugs that we kind of fix after releases and stuff like that. So those will start to have their own release notes, just so that we're more transparent with everybody else. Additionally, Celigo University that Dave went through, if you and your team want to learn the platform more, you can come over to the university. Our team is constantly building out new videos and new trainings for you to consume in here. If I come over here and start off with like a level 1 certification, it'll kind of just walk you through using Celigo all the way up to level 4 training, which will go through like EDI and handlebar expressions, JavaScript functions, and stuff like that. So we're constantly adding here, but it's a really good way for users to learn the platform. Thanks for letting me show, Dave.
That's great. Thanks for showing. And that's not all. There's one last thing. There's a Celigo portal. And that enables you to see new features and enhancements that the team's working on or planning for upcoming releases. And you can also submit your own ideas. You can vote on other people's ideas and add comments. And you can open that product portal from the navigation bar on the side and Integrator IO. So before we move on to Q&A, is there anything else you want to add, Tyler?
Yeah, so I will say with the product portal, for now that I'm on the product team, it's really nice to get feedback from customers. And when you can actually, when you specify your actual like use case for a specific feature, it really helps prioritize it and really helps us get those use cases aligned, so that when we're building it out, we make sure to keep that in mind when we're building out new features. So if you come to the product portal, you can scroll through here, click through anything you want. I guess I'll say like global search, for example. I can come in here. How important is it to me? Maybe it's critical, and then I can actually write out why is it critical to you, right? Like why should we build this out, and what's your actual use case, so that we can keep it in mind as we're building it out. That's all I had.
That's awesome. So I'm going to go through some of these questions. Some of them might be kind of backwards. So there was a delay on those. So some of you asked stuff we couldn't hit it in context. So during or shortly after the Delta export preview, Tyler, we got a question, but this is just for preview, right? The export is not affected.
That's correct. Yeah. So this is just for preview. When the flow is actually turned on and running, it'll utilize its last runtime still. So this is not modify flow runtime at all. It's just for previewing. So when you're building out your flow, you actually have records to preview as you're building out.
Here's one. The NetSuite SQL queries you demonstrated earlier, were those through NetSuite QL or through the JDBC connector?
Yep. So these are actually through the JDBC connector. But the JDBC connector to NetSuite does come with an additional licensing fee on the NetSuite side. So I do recognize that maybe not all companies have that additional offering on their NetSuite instance. And if you don't, I would recommend it. I mean, it's really, especially if you have like an analytics team and want to build out reporting, it's super powerful to bring out millions of records from NetSuite at a time. The alternative to that, you can utilize SuiteQL via like their SuiteTalk APIs. And actually, I did put a help article out there showing users how to create that connection in Celigo to be able to run those as well. That actually doesn't take an additional license on the NetSuite side, but you are limited to how many results you can export without having that additional license on the NetSuite side.
So yeah, on the HTTP exports, the question was, does the file at the URL have to be at a public location, or is it possible to specify authentication for that step?
Yeah, so currently it has to be a public URL or it has to be a pre-signed URL. So a lot of times within that URL, it might have a signature tied to it with some, it might expire after 5 minutes or something like that. So we can handle those as well. But if it has to have some authentication, like to the specific endpoint, you wouldn't utilize that new feature. You would just utilize connections as you currently would, because the connection itself would have that authentication and you would pass in that download URL to your connection like you normally would for like looking up additional files within your flow.
Okay, we have one here. We need to run the flow sometime to see the nature data flowing from one end to another end. This usually creates a complexity for the developer to do a custom flow.
Can you say that one again?
We need to run the flow sometimes to see the nature data flowing from one end to another end. This usually creates a complexity for the developer to a custom flow. You need clarification?
Yeah, I think need some clarification there.
Okay, I'll send that off. Will support for stored procedure execution be added for DB connectors?
It should, we can probably take that offline, but it should already be possible. I have done it on a few different DB instances, so I'd be kind of curious on your specific use case and if it's maybe some specific type that isn't currently supported, but would like to take that offline and get that feedback.
Yes, we'll have the CSM for that customer get that scheduled. With the NetSuite JDBC, what are the limitations as far as record types accessible via SQL query?
Yep. So with the NetSuite JDBC connector, so you have those two different schemas. So you have the older NetSuite schema and the newer NetSuite 2.com schema. On the newer schema, it utilizes all of your permissions and role-based accesses within NetSuite. So whenever you establish that JDBC connection, if that user, if the role that you specified for your connection doesn't have permissions to access certain records or certain fields within those records, you can't see them. But if you set up a role to access everything which is they have a default data integration role that you can utilize, or you could use an admin role. You can access all records that are within NetSuite. So you've got transactions, transaction lines, customers. I mean, any record that you can think of, you can access and bring it into Celigo.
Do you plan on having the ability to send email from a flow in future releases? Example, data comes into Celigo and goes out via email with a CSV attached.
Yep. It's definitely on the roadmap to make it easier. It is somewhat possible currently if you have like some kind of temporary place to store it, and then you've got the link on your email sending off. Maybe that link's like publicly accessible. So for example, right, maybe I go to Google Drive, store the file there, make it publicly accessible, and then have that URL put into the email message sent off. But right, there would need to be some kind of enhancement there to specifically upload that CSV and then attach it to the email natively within the Gmail connector or Outlook or whatever other email client you're using. So it's definitely on the roadmap to make those specific type of requirements easier.
Yeah, I would say that's kind of similar to when we had our conversation about intelligent data processing. We're not going to have an email engine in the application, but we will continue to invest in better connectivity, better connectors to be able to perform those sorts of activities.
Yeah, and for email specifically, I haven't played around a lot with the outbound messaging. I have played with like inbound email messaging. So a good example is vendors, right? They'll send you PDFs or CSV files that are attached to an email. What I've done in the past is make the source of a flow be Gmail or Outlook, grab the message and then grab the attachment up and then post it to like NetSuite or some other ERP system. So that has been done. The reverse way has been done a few times before.
When a crash happens, is that reflected in the run console? And with these changes, will we be able to retry the crashed page?
Yep. So the crash is available in the run console. It'll, just like you're used to with error management, you'll see the list of records that have crashed during runtime, and you can, just like normal error management, you can select all or select specific ones to have them retry.
Is there a method to insert large static lookup lists into a mapping step via the Celigo APIs that are now being shared on Postman? Typing them manually is labor intensive and error prone.
Yeah, this is a hotly requested feature to be able to have a standalone resource for basically cache tables that you could utilize across your flows. I will say it's one of the highest priorities for a new feature to be released. And I was actually meeting with the product manager last week about it to kind of build out the requirement so that it could start being built out. The use case there, right, is you would be able to have your various lookup tables available in a common resource that you could then utilize across flows. So it is definitely in the pipeline being worked on.
Has there been any change enhancement to allow ordering of flows or processes that manage multiple steps between integrated systems?
Ordering of flows, wondering if that more like ordering it in just like your list of your integration, or allowing flows to daisy chain off of each other if you need like one process to kick off after this flow has ran. Because if it's the latter, let me go a quick example real quick. Like if it's the list of flows, for example, right, I built this out 1, 2, 3, 4 so that it had ordered down because it's ordered based off of the name of the flow. Within the flow itself, on the settings wheel, you've got the ability to specify a flow to run after this flow is complete. So I'm not sure, without getting some more details on there, not exactly sure what the ask is, but those are kind of the two things that I've thought about with that question.
So there's our internal and cloud systems are so locked down, we cannot get any connectors to our company systems running accessible publicly. Other than the internal agent for getting query data, is there a service that can allow Integrator IO to get files from cloud storage?
Yeah, so I assume, so to go to like an on-prem service that's like behind a firewall, we really have two options currently, and it is the agent or it is whitelisting those IPs publicly. I will say, when you are whitelisting your IPs, I know typically you can get pushback from security teams on that. That IP range we do own. So within the help center, there is a screenshot of us actually owning that block of IPs. So sometimes that does help alleviate some concerns there, and that does make it possible for us to then connect in. Or the on-prem agent route would be the other way to have to go.
Does Celigo provide runtime reports to identify peak runtimes for custom or standard flows?
There are some visualizations here within the platform, and we are working on kind of more of a holistic dashboarding capability within the platform. But if I come over here to the integration, let's see here, over into the analytics tab, there are a few graphs here. So like by date, it's not drilled down into the specific like hour, but by date, you can kind of see your estimated successes of flows, average processing time per record on an average basis. With that, I will say what I've done in the past is utilize our APIs to actually export that job data. So you can actually export that over into like Snowflake and then have your BI tool report on it as well. So that's another possibility that you can go through, but that is something I've done before in the past.
Is there any plan to add some kind of direct download output for testing? For example, run flow and then present link to download a CSV. Right now, for the answer just given, you have to use a connection for a file output location, which adds cost.
Can you say that one again, Dave?
Is there any plan to add some kind of direct download output for testing? For example, run flow and then present a link to download a CSV.
Not that I'm aware of. Typically the way I've done that is to just go to a FTP server or S3 bucket. Costs on those are usually pretty minimal. So that's normally the route I go, but definitely if you put something in product board, we can have somebody kind of go through the use case and see if other customers are asking for the same thing.
Is there a plan to add parameters, filters, options to Celigo APIs?
Yeah, so some endpoints do accept specific parameters, but it definitely is on the roadmap to enhance those APIs to allow more parameters to be able to be passed, and to document them on the Postman collections to be able to within those Postman collections, specify what parameters are allowed for specific endpoints, so that you can be able to see, what is allowed and what isn't allowed. So it's definitely on the roadmap.
Can we expect to see dark mode for the UI at some point?
I do think you will see dark mode here fairly soon.
With the latest update to the Shopify connector, can you tell us if the connector uses the Shopify REST API or GraphQL API? Since Shopify applies rate limiting differently whether you're one over the other, this clarification would be appreciated.
Yep, I think currently the Shopify native or pre-built connector is just REST based. We have recently I've taken it out of these slides, but we have upgraded the GraphQL connector onto the newest framework. So we have a big initiative to move all of our connectors over to the newest HTTP framework that has all the same functionality. So everything would be same across the board. GraphQL has migrated up to that framework as well. So you should see fairly soon the ability to switch between those different types on the connector level. And of course, we'll kind of go in priority of connectors, but I think it's probably safe to assume Shopify is pretty up there on having that. That being said, you can create connections with the GraphQL connector to Shopify. Yep.
Okay, I think we've kind of reached time. So I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. I'd really like to thank Tyler for his background as a user of the product as well as a product manager. I think you brought a great perspective on Celigo, and I think you did a great job today, Tyler. Thank you. Thanks everyone for being a customer. If we haven't answered some of the questions, you'll get contacted by probably your CSM to address those that were a little too specific that we didn't want to bring up for the group. And everybody, thanks, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.